Hey guys, I have completely lost my sense of time. I don't even know what time is it anymore because I've been working on this guy's guide for way too long, and I'm proud to say that after almost 5,000 words, Phainon's early access review is finally gonna be here for you. I would say that this is probably one of my most in-depth and documented early access reviews I've ever done because he really introduces a huge variety of different mechanics, team buildings, and possibilities to play him, as well as future expectations of what to see for his kit going forward. So I tried to cram in as many of these thoughts as I could within a single video, but I think if I were to say everything I wanted to say, it's gonna be more than like a 1 hour long, which nobody's gonna read all that. So this entire early access, I'm gonna be trying to bring it down as concise as possible while still giving you guys the most relevant pointers with regards to Phainon's early access, right? So without further ado, let's just jump into, in my opinion, the absolute cinema that is Phainon's entire game. In summary, Phainon is gonna be our version 3 definition of unlimited budget works. As you can see from all of the animations, the main story quest, marketing, the actual animation of his combats, and the lore and build up for. As you guys would have seen from the extensive marketing budget that he has gotten from the main story quest as well as personal kit, with the first ever 3-skill implementation while the added mechanic of the brand new one-man army during his ultimate state. His playstyle is essentially based on getting 12 core flames as fast as possible to destroy all enemies within this auto-rotation, granting him 8 fixed actions, a little bit similar to Acheron getting 9 slash streams and dealing tremendous damage, or Firefly transforming into the Sam mode and then just doing a lot of damage, right? Since his buffs are also going to be active during this ultimate, regardless of the ally's turn, any harmony supports can function with him, although some will be definitively better than others. And aside from harmony supports, even other non-harmony supports can also work, which we're going to be exploring in a little bit, right? So jumping into the character kit as a whole, Phainon is a true blue hyper carry that primarily focuses on stacking as many buffs as possible, because not only does buffs provide him with the much needed core flame to get into the ultimate stage, all buffs provided are going to be in the exact same number of turns remaining during Phainon's ultimate. So units like Teen Yumi's Benediction, a Bronya's skill, they will last for the entire 8 actions all the way until Phainon's ultimate expire. Now that being said, debuffers such as Jiao Qiu, Cypher, or I guess Tribi you want to consider as like a debuffer, they can all fundamentally work with Phainon. Jiao Qiu can apply the stacks via his zone, Cypher still records the damage inside Phainon's ultimate, and in my opinion, I think Cypher is actually really good with Phainon, and Tribi's kit still works outside of the lack of follow-up damage. So for this guy, I do want to limit the scope a little bit like I mentioned, so I will only be focusing on the basic team building as well as the units. Do expect another cook featuring the aforementioned debuffers as well as their performances, right? And aside from the buffs, Phainon also emphasizes on the additional action value to bring his ultimate downtime as low as possible. Now, even though all allies will be unavailable during the ultimate, the additional turns will be crucial if Phainon is unable to end the fight within a single ultimate, which is going to be the case for most players without high-end vertical investments or those not running a sustainless team comp. Units like Sunday and Bronya, they would be crucial in ensuring this minimal downtime for Phainon's ultimate stage. So with that being explained, let's just take a look into the actual kit itself. I'll be splitting this Phainon's kit into before the ultimate phase as well as after, or rather during the ultimate phase, right? So basic attack before ultimate, you can just ignore this unless you run out of skill points for Sunday and Bronya, then you run the basic attack. For the skill, you gain 2 points of core flame. You basically would run this every single turn to generate core flame, similar to how Acheron will use this skill every single turn to generate slash streams. Multipliers are honestly not too shabby, but nothing too important aside from the stack generation. And then for the ultimate stage, this is going to be the main gimmick for Phainon, essentially having the transform mechanics such as Firefly, where he enters within this brand new territory with a brand new unlimited budget cinema, absolute cinema, right? So you do obtain 8 turns, which is fixed at 60% of its base speed. So a high-speed Phainon running speed boots, speed subsets, whatever it's going to be, it doesn't really make the 8 turns go any faster, nor does 0 cycling a wave result in a reset for new actions. The ultimate state will always end at the very last action, which means that any speed on Phainon is effectively worthless since it will always be based on your base speed, unless you are going to be running a specific setup, which I'm going to be mentioning later, involving another unit, right? So do consider this graph as your reference over here for no signature light cone with signature light cone E1S1 as well as E1S1 with 8 kills, right? So you can see all of these different values: base speed, ultimate speed, action value. Aside from this, you also unlock the 3 abilities, all of which have the specific timings for specific users. I'll be explaining this in the ultimate itself. On the very last hit, it will then transform back into the normal state after launching a massive attack that literally seems to shatter reality, because you can see that the TV is turning off and something like it's sort of like a breaking the fourth kind of thing. Very interesting, likely tying to his role in the main story quest. Also, absolutely insane 960% damage multiplier, right? With the Trace Shine Like Veiler, this also means that the next ultimate following this will have an additional 50% attack buff, bringing him up to a 100% attack buff when you enter into the second ultimate, meaning that if your first ultimate wasn't dealing enough damage, your next ultimate will do even more damage. But do know that this caps at the second ultimate. So far from all of my experiences playing, I haven't really found a single time where I actually need to cast my ultimate more than 2 times. At least for all of the Memory of Chaos fights, so just something to reference for, right? So going into his talent, you essentially want to just give him buffs, because the buffs will give him stacks, as well as this 30% crit damage buff, which is going to be pretty much a permanent 30% crit damage buff with 3 turn uptime. Very, very straightforward. You can stack this up to 15 at the maximum, so after transformation, because you get 3 stacks back, you also get another 3 stacks back because of the Trace March to Oblivion. So this is gonna help you basically reduce the downtime for ultimate if you can somehow stack this to beyond 12, right? Keep in mind, this is also inclusive of getting hits from enemies as long as they actually hit Phainon. So if you're up against units that actually hit the rest of the team, it would impact you getting your ultimate uptime. So sometimes you might just want to gamble the RNG a little bit and hope that they hit Phainon more frequently instead of the rest of the teams outside of the ultimate phase, right? With the other Trace Bite in Flames, healing or shielding can also increase Phainon's damage. Mainly, this is just to not make a normal sustained comp feel like absolutely horrible damage-wise, because none of your teammates are going to be in battle or targetable within this ultimate phase. With the ultimate's damage reduction as well as a self-sustain roll, the roll of a sustain is almost negligible, so this will help to at least improve his damage slightly for players seeking a safer team comp if you are uncertain that you can survive the enemies outside from the ultimate stage, right? The energy regeneration also provides you 1 more stack, so units like Sunday, Ting as well as Hue, they can all expedite the ultimate form. Now note the specific wording, it only works with abilities. So light cone effects like Quid Pro Quo and Shared Feeling, unfortunately it will not trigger, which once again, reduces the reliance on all of the sustained units, right? So that is pretty much it. And then last thing before we jump into the ultimate form itself, that's gonna be the technique. It essentially is the direct Pro Max version of Akron's technique, because you can just one-shot all of the enemies, right? Basically, you always want to do this to guarantee your damage, energy, as well as your Scourge, which would be used during his ultimate mode to ensure the big AoE nuke. So now going into the main meat and potatoes for Phainon, that is going to be his ultimate form, right? So during this ultimate form, he is going to be granting this immunity to crowd control, as well as a massive stat buff, 1 extra life proc, which you really don't want to trigger because it will waste all of the remaining actions within the ultimate, a built-in 20% max HP sustain, and a 50% speed buff to expedite our supports to bring back Phainon back into ultimate again. Now note that this immunity to crowd control, it does not include normal debuffs such as defense down, as you guys can see from the goldfish over here. Aside from that, the massive stat buff being 80% attack and 270% HP drastically improves your survivability against your enemies, especially with the HP portion in tandem with the damage reduction effects from the rest of his skill. Now during this ultimate state, all buffs applied would remain on Phainon as if he just went into another universe separate from the realms of reality with the rest of the supports, right? So units like Sunday, Ting, Lin, Bronya, you don't have to worry about the 8 actions removing any of the buffs after 1, 2, or even 3 turns, right? Scourge is going to be the main mechanic used by this second enhanced skill, the AoE Blast, which I'm going to be explaining a little bit. But first of all, Taking a look into this first ability, the Enhanced Basic gets 2 Scourge with a very decent multiplier of 250%, very comparable to the counter damage multiplier at 160% base plus the Soul Scorch stacks, which is going to improve this by 20% per stack, right? You would use this to gain your Scourge stacks for AoE hit. Generally though, you will only use this when the enemies are less than 2, since the counter stance does generate more Scourge based on the number of enemies on the field. Another situation where you may want to use the basic is when the enemies are crowd control and you want to prolong the state, but that is very niche, and generally I will always try to use the counter mode if there are going to be more than 2 enemies, because the main form of damage within this ultimate form is going to be from the AoE blast from running 4 stacks of Scourge, right? That is pretty much it for the basic, and then for the second skill is going to be the Enhanced Skill 1 counter, where he gains Scourge based on the number of enemy targets. You will most commonly use this for almost every single scenario more than 2 enemies, especially in pure fiction, and the rotation will pretty much revolve around Phainon using the AoE skill blast, the AoE nuke blast where he summons a planet, and then you afterwards transform back into the counter stance and you just rinse this back and forth whenever possible to get the highest number of Scourge stacks, right? 100% action value advances the enemy with a massive 75% damage reduction. So even if Phainon is at 4 or even 3000 HP, the damage reduction can actually go very far, especially with the 20% HP sustain from any attacks, inclusive of your ultimate and pretty much any of the things over here, right? Now, sometimes this can also save you your squishy supports from a dangerous enemy scenario, most commonly seen from this Savrok and MOC12 Wolf, right? Where you can actually force the action value advance in the enemies upwards, forcing Savrok to summon his hand as well as AoE nuke, which means that they will not be using these abilities at the end of Phainon's ultimate during the time in which the rest of your allies are going to be on field. So do use this ability if you are going to be in a situation where your ultimate is exiting and your teammate is going to be taking a substantial amount of damage. So if you can actually mitigate this by taunting them and bringing them up, then definitely do so, right? The damage for this counter is directly tied to the number of hits based on the Soul Rending Blaze state, right? Soul Rending Blaze is different from Scourge, is different from Core Flame. I know there's a lot of terms, but this is strictly for the counter, with each additional hit received from the enemy increasing your multiplier by 20%. Damage is going to be a little bit similar to Yungli's counter, is a bounce based on the individual hits itself. And now we can finally get into the most important ability, which is gonna be like, I don't know, the Planet Killer, right? He drops a planet on you, right? Massive AoE damage, dispels all debuffs with an absolutely insane 1170% multiplier. And yes, as of this day, I do believe that this is the highest multiplier damage skill in the entirety of honkaistarrail, as of this moment anyways, right? You should only use this at 4 stacks to deal the absolutely insane highest amount of 1170, because you do want to get the 450% damage multiplier, and this is going to be inclusive of hitting the bouncers as well as the 450%. So if you do not hit 4 stacks of Scourge and you use this ability, the damage will fall off drastically. So never ever do that. Only use this if you have at least 4 stacks, right? The rotation should always be using this skill as a priority wherever 4 stacks are available, because only 4 stacks can be consumed in a single instance, and then you go back into counter or your basic attack against your respective scenarios, right? Now, do keep in mind, you can store up to 7 stacks out of 4. So sometimes if you think that you're going to be an overkill, for example, with like 1 HP guy left, you could just use a basic attack or a counter just to save the remaining stacks for the next bigger enemy in the future, right? So that is pretty much it for the entirety of Phainon's kit. Hopefully this explains it down to you guys. So essentially, to summarize everything, you want to give him the stacks as fast as possible, let him enter into the ultimate stage, and then when he gets into the ultimate stage, you cycle between his counter mode as well as his normal basic attack depending on the enemy, and then slam this enhanced scale AoE 2 as frequently as possible. And yep, that's pretty much how you play, right? So moving to the minor tracers, 37.3% crit damage, 12% crit rate, and 5 speed. Very nice tracers, if I can say so myself, because this is a 61.3 crit value from tracers alone. So yep, absolutely insane. In skill leveling priority, you would just want to level every single one of them, because you are going to be using basic, skill, ultimate, everything will be coming in involvement. If you want to prioritize skill over basic, over talent, over the ultimate, right? So that's pretty much it. And now I want to touch on 2 key pointers before we jump on into the Eidolons, Lyco, and team comps. First of which being the sustain versus sustainless debate, right? Now I want to dedicate this segment specifically to the interactions and how Phainon works in this unique ultimate state, leading to potentially one of the biggest beneficiaries of a sustainless team comp within honkaistarrail. Now, unlike Hysteris, which desperately wants a sustain to ensure Pollark's uptime, Phainon acts as the complete opposite, because he wants to be sustainless as much as possible, since having a sustain would lead to a much higher damage drop-off compared to any other DPS. Now, remember, during the ultimate state, when your allies are no longer on field and cannot be targeted, combined with his 70% damage reduction and 20% max HP, Phainon has one of the lowest sustained pressure amongst any DPS in HSR, even more so than Super Break. On top of that, most supports nowadays should have at least one or even maybe two defensive main stats, which brings their overall baseline survivability even higher compared to like running dual DPS units or even debuffers, right? Now, this can be a little bit scary after the ultimate expires and where your teammates will become targetable again, at least until Phainon casts his ultimate. So assuming that your teammates can generate enough stacks and tank through usually one enemy rotation, the sustained pressure is once again going to be elevated when you go back into the ultimate. So on the flip side of running sustain, although Phainon has a built-in trait with additional damage from heals and shields, it doesn't really compensate enough for the fact that his overall buffs and stack generation would fall a lot more unless you're specifically using Huo, because Huo actually doesn't really double up as a sustain. She really acts as more so as a pseudo sustain plus energy regeneration support, right? So the upside for this is that during the ultimate downtime for your sustain teams, there's gonna be a lot more leeway and comfort in maintaining your team's survival, at least until Phainon gets his ultimate again, especially against high pressure burst damage enemies such as Flame Reaver or Hule ultimates, right? From this table over here, there are already some disparity, especially against Aventurine with a Hue dedicated sustain team with a very normal Sunday Tyrion and, for example, in this case, Sparkle team, right? On top of this current performance in Memory of Chaos 12, which might not look that big, but in the future, when more and more dedicated support slots are going to be released for Phainon, I can foresee this disparity between both Sustain and Sustainless archetypes dragging out even further. It's almost as if like the rich get richer, right? The more damage you're dealing, then the even more damage you're going to be able to exponentially increase compared to the player that's going to be still running Sustain, where you're going to be losing out a lot more damage when the supports themselves just gives him more and more synergy specific to Phainon itself, right? And now I do want to talk about the next thing, and yes, this is going to be from the early access server, but I do feel that this should be made aware to all of you guys who are watching my content, the ultimate problem with Phainon. So from my experience with Phainon, I do notice the inherent issues tied with his unique ultimate mechanic and some possible solutions within some of these issues, right? So in Memory of Chaos, the remaining actions will be tied based on the actions taken in your previous wave, no matter what, which means that you cannot reset back into 8 attacks for wave 2. For most situations, I do find myself finishing wave 1 0 cycle with about 4 actions remaining, and then the remaining 4 actions for wave 2. Now, by the time the ultimate actually ends in wave 2, since the action value is going to be based on the duration of the actual ultimate stage, you can see that the rest of the team is not able to take action within the wave itself anymore, because it's as if time has already went past in the real world, and then once Phainon goes back into the real world, everybody has already moved on, right? So that is gonna be the best analogy I can think of. The ultimate downtime aside from this is also basically almost impossible to get a back-to-back ultimate using the roster we have right now. So for some other specific enemies, this mechanic for Phainon is also very counterintuitive, most notably Flame Reaver and Nigador, which is a little bit ironic if you guys look at the story, right? Because of the way that the taunt and action value advance work from his counter stance, Flame Reaver, he will immediately take action and kill 2 of his clones in phase 1, and if this was in the second phase, he will then immediately kill all of his clones. In Aidolons Shadows, this situation was not as pronounced due to a different set of mechanic, but just something more to be aware of, and Nigador also simply does not summon a single spear if there are no other allies on the field for spears to be summoned. While also for Phainon himself, he does struggle to hit the head count checks for war armor since all of your allies are basically off field and you're purely relying on Phainon himself in order to hit the stacks generations for the number of hits, right? So lastly, we do have your Pure Fiction as well as Atk Shadow performances respectively. I do find this ultimate mode to struggle in these modes as well. So for Pure Fiction, you essentially have to wait for the enemies to take action twice due to the action value advance. Now, while this works with getting stacks for his AoE blast, the actual time it takes is going to be drastically longer. 1, simply from the animations of you looking at the minions slamming their attacks at Phainon, and 2, because you are limited to 8 actions specifically, and the cycle will always be using your counter stance into your AoE in Pure Fiction, you would lose a huge amount of action value in order to finish the fights because there is no way to make Phainon any faster than that fixed amount of time. This issue, however, it can be drastically fixed with an Eidolon 1 to increase his speed after the kills, but at E0, I found this to be extremely glaring, at least in my performance over here, right? And if lastly for Atk Shadows, since there are no other allies with Phainon in this field, it is very inefficient for Phainon himself to break the toughness bar, often just straight up beating the boss raw before even the bar is broken, which takes a decent amount of action value to accomplish in the first place. Now, between both of these, I do feel that Pure Fiction is where Phainon suffers the most as of now, unless unless for all of these aforementioned issues I've mentioned for the ultimate stage in MOC, Pure Vision, and Epoch Shadows, future more dedicated support slots comes out in order to synergize with Phainon even more. Because if you want to think about it, right now, I'm going to be talking about it in the team comp section, all of his best installed team comps, none of them really last within the current version. To a certain extent, I guess you could say Tribby, but all of the supports you see from like Sunday, Timmy, and Bronya, they're all like really, really long baseline 1.0 units or from version 2. So in version 3, if we are going to be getting Saridra or even any other of the future supports that may be coming out, we might see a much more synergistic pairing with Phainon itself, which means that I would say if you're intentionally fixated on making Phainon to perform to the best of his capabilities, do expect to potentially invest a little bit more into his team comps going forward into the future, right? So that is pretty much it for the two notes I want to say, and now let's actually get into the build itself, first of which being the light cone, right? So this is a pretty decent light cone with a base speed increase. You have no other base speed increase for Destruction light cone, but I would say that Phainon is not going to be as S1 reliant as compared to other units, for example like Asterisk, right? So the Signature light cone, you basically get 12 base speed, ignores 18% of your defense, and then you get this 60% damage buff when you have the Blazing Sun, right? Regarding the 12 speed, kindly refer to this graph over here, right? Like I mentioned just now during the ultimate stage where I show you all for the fixed speed segment. Now, however, this main thing is that the ultimate damage itself is fundamentally tied to its damage output, which still comes out as roughly 25% higher than 4 of an Aeon from raw stats alone. And the speed does allow Phainon to cycle a little bit faster, especially against enemies that are going to be a little bit more annoying, such as, for example, Sarok as well as Flame Weaver, right? So you can see over here from the damage calculations, we are going to be roughly 75% damage increase in terms of the counter, as well as a 79 damage increase in terms of the AoE blast. But TLDR, if you don't want to get Phainon Signature Light Cone, then just get the 4th Aeon, right? The GOAT, the greatest Light Cone of all time for 3 phase, right? So that's pretty much it. Moving on into the Relics segment, relatively straightforward running the brand new 4-piece as well as the brand new 2-piece, right? For your main set and subsets, you want to focus on crit rate body over crit damage, attack boots unless you have a very specific setup where you want to run speed boots, planners where you want a physical damage or attack, and always attack rope subsets only focusing on crit value. Now Phainon, he does not care about speed whatsoever, and it's way better to run a fast Sunday and slow Phainon to pack attack percentage so that his ultimate phase actually deals a lot more damage every single hit. You want to grant him as much crit as possible, focusing on crit rate because a lot of his support such as Sunday, Bronya, or Sparkle, you can give substantial crit damage on top of his personal built-in 30% crit damage buff, right? Now for the speed boots itself, there is one scenario, okay, I'm just gonna spoil it, it has to do with Robin. That's pretty much it, right? But other than that, 99% of the time, I would prefer running attack boots on Phainon, right? And then for the set bonus, you do want to run the Wave Strider Captain, brand new 4-piece that we have been getting from the previous patch. This is going to be the most synergistic 4-piece, perfect for the attack percentage buff, which lasts throughout the course of his ultimate stage. Now, I think Scholar would have worked very well, but unfortunately, the second line only applies to the next skill and not next turn. So, because it's not a one-turn buff like your Wave Strider, the Scholar's damage actually goes away after immediately using one skill. So that is just a little bit unfortunate. And then for the 2-piece here, you can choose between Routine Arena or the brand new Arcadia. So for the brand new 2-piece where there are currently more or less than 4 allies to increase your damage as well as your mural spread damage, blah blah, out to a maximum of 4 to 3 stacks. At the end of the day, TLDR, there's actually very little difference between Routine Arena and Arcadia, since his biggest nuke is ultimately coming from the enhanced skills, both the counter as well as the AoE blast. Now I did try this with Arcadia, but 11% less crit damage, performed only a little bit better compared to Routine Arena, literally by 1.4% for the AoE blast and 2.77% for the counter. I also then made a comparison between attack sphere as well as physical damage sphere, both of them on Arcadia, once again favoring the side with better subsets. Now I do feel that the counter is going to be a little bit different because of the bounce as well as the toughness bar breaking of the fish, but it does favor attack a little bit more due to the fact that it does have 11% more crit damage. Once again, extremely minor differences, 1%, 2%, whichever one you have better subsets on, you can basically just go ahead and use them, right? So with that, we have come to the Eidolon portion of Phainon. Now, he does have very strong Eidolon, especially the Eidolon 2, comparable to D-Herda and Cassius. Some might say this might even rival Cassius E2, right? But let's just take a look over here. So for your Eidolon 1, it's going to be giving you an up to a 1.5% speed up for all the way to 84%. So very nice those speed and crit damage buff. But I would say for an Eidolon 1, it's actually not going to be that impactful outside of your vision right now. However, Eidolon 2, physical rare spend 20%, consuming 4 Scourge to use your foundation, which is the AoE blast, you get an extra turn. This is going to be the Pokke game-changing. I feel like I say game-changing quite a bit. Your editor, whenever we do like game-changing, just like game-changing, and then add like a whoa, like an overreacting or whatever, right? Okay, game-changing Eidolon 2. Having the rare pen in E2 instead of E6 is already really good. But what's even better is that now you literally get an extra turn after the AoE blast attack at 4 stacks. And 4 stacks should always be the bare minimum whenever you use this AoE blast attack. And as we have seen from time and time again, the strongest DPS Eidolons, they are always fundamentally tied to either additional action value such as E2 Dio, E2 Firefly, and E2 Herta, or additional ultimate uptime such as E2 Akron, E2 Phainon, and E2 Castrus. Now this is going to be one of those Eidolons belonging to the additional action value category, which ties perfectly by having even more 4 Scourge AoE attacks, which then turns back to even more extra turns because this Eidolon has no cooldown unlike E2 Firefly, which means you can effectively possibly act 16 times a roll instead of 8 times, assuming you get enough stacks from every single rotation, which means this is going to be only possible if you're always getting 4 stacks after every single counter, right? So looking forward to see more of this showcase in the future, but I would say this is an absolutely game-changing, very strong Eidolon, right? Then going forward into the Eidolon 4, you basically guarantees 4 stacks of Soul Scorch, which is going to be tied to your counter stance during the counter for a little bit more damage. Your basic attack, it will still hold more value against single target scenarios because at the end of the day, even though this increases your counter stance damage, majority of Phainon's damage is ultimately still going to be coming from the AoE blast where he summons a goddamn planet, right? So that's gonna be there. And then finally for Eidolon 6, with enough buffs for Phainon, you can almost guarantee a 100% ultimate uptime back to back and opens up a very interesting team building perspective of all-in damage instead of action value, because now technically Phainon could just never leave the ultimate stage before the fight is over, especially at E6. So this is just a potential way to just bring everything to the next level, removing action value advance and just go all-in damage. True damage is going to be the cherry on top, which is basically the better version of Respan. We'll take a deeper look into the E6 going forward into the future, right? So at the end of the day, E1 or S1, I would say for both of them, they're actually not that necessary for a DPS like Phainon itself. S1 does have 4 of an Aeons as a substitute, albeit it's going to be roughly 25% damage drop-off, and E1 is going to be a stepping stone towards the E2. Now, I will be more reserved and save for future teammate vertical investment, such as, for example, Ceridra, since Phainon's current best slot team comp now has a lot of potential to grow. I would say the DPS of Phainon as it is right now, it has the bare minimum baseline benchmark, very similar to D Herta back in the days where she only could use Baby Herta Saval as well as RMC, right? So this is going to be where he has a lot of room to shine, and even with his best in slot support as of this point of time, it can be Sunday, he still has potential upgrades to be discussed for all of his different slots, especially if you're going to be running him as a Sustainless DPS. So bottom line, if I really had to pick one, if it's not going to be vertical teammate investments, then S1 is the suitable pick simply because of the cost reasons, and saving your E1 or potentially E2 in the future when his team comp actually improves would be the better play for me. And now we have come to the final segment of this entire early access review, and that is going to be the team comp. I spent a ridiculous amount of time with Phainon because oh boy, right? If you guys like this overworking, I don't know, my eye bags are dying, you know, like this video, subscribe, all the kind of stuff, right? Yay! I also hearts my editors, you know, for overworking with me as well for the past couple of days. Any case, right, for the team comps. In the middle of me typing my script for this entire early access guide, I initially want to do like a 2 or 3 Sustainless team comps and showcase one example with a sustained team comp. But after playing around with every single Sustainless team I found, I decided to, you know what, I'm just gonna show y'all my findings with Sustainless exclusively because there are so many variations and this video length is not enough to cover Sustainless alone, right? Even units that may not seem that good because they don't buff Phainon directly, such as for example Robin, Tribi, or even Cypher, they can show exceptional performance, so do expect even more team building videos for Phainon in the future, right? As mentioned just now, his team has a lot of room to grow in terms of every single support slot we have right now in support slot 1, 2, and 3, inclusive of Sunday. So Phainon mains, if you do want to commit into his best, it's not team comp, would need some preparations for pulling for multiple units in the future updates to improve his performance even more, right? So let's just jump straight in. I tried 4 different variations of this team comps with Phainon, and you guys can see for the performances over here, and I'm just going to be discussing what my thoughts are, how it felt playing them in this current Memory of Chaos 12 rotation, right? So the very important rule in teams building for Phainon is going to be the baseline foundation of Sunday plus either Bronya or Tingyun. I would say Bronya is going to be a little bit more favorable in Tingyun, but this is going to be the reason, right? Every single one of these units, especially Sunday, they are going to be having the absolute highest synergy with Phainon because you do give him both the action value, the buffs, as well as the energy, which then includes back as the stack generation, right? You do want to run a fast Sunday with a slow Phainon because Phainon gains no benefits from any speed, resulting in attack boost performing substantially better during its ultimate state, right? This also allows Sunday to freely cast his skill without being as pressure for skill points as compared to a fast Phainon and slower Sunday, right? The flip side for this, however, I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, and that's going to be with regards to Robin, right? But aside from this, Tingyun with Dance is also a very strong neutral pick with the energy regeneration providing Core Flames with Phainon as well, on top of the Benediction buff lasting throughout the entirety of our stage, right? Then Bronya is also going to be very nice since a 1-turn buff from the skill as well as the massive crit damage and attack buff, they can all be permanent during Phainon's ultimate stage, while providing the much needed action value to double Phainon's Core Flame generation, especially if you pair up both Bronya and Sunday in the same team. So yes, every single one of support buffs, if you're going to be running this with Phainon, they can last throughout the entire ultimate phase, which is why the foundation for Phainon's team building is going to look something along the line of Sunday, Bronya, Tingyun, 3 of them. Ideally pick either Sunday or Bronya, and then you can just slap on Tingyun in the middle, right? Then outside from these foundations, I'm going to be talking about a couple of niche picks over here, right? Now, Robin. Ironically, unironically, she is her, she is him, I don't know, she worked the best, right? Ironically, she was the fastest clearing team, one cycling both halves at E0 S1. Yep, not E1 Robin. The entire team this video test out was all with E0 S1. Everybody was done in E0, and I'm confident that after I mess around with this a little bit more, we can get a double 0 cycle, but I'll save that in the future video, right? The bad news for Robin is that her song actually still plays in the ultimate phase. Good news is that Robin's damage amplification is still one of the highest, providing the additional damage, the attack, as well as action value advance outside from the ultimate stage. Now note that for this showcase, I used attack boots on Phainon, but speed boots with Robin might be the optimal play because you can then gain 2 more stacks after you cast a Robin ultimate, because now if you were to tune your speed such as it's Phainon first, followed by Sunday, followed by Bronya, after Robin casts ultimate, your Phainon does get an additional 2 stacks because he's before Sunday, right? So this could help you to translate into a much higher ultimate uptime, but on the flip side, it would also reduce his personal damage during this ultimate stage. So stay tuned to find out in the future when I eventually get a 0 cycle, right? So that's gonna be it for Robin. And then for Sparkle, she also has really synergistic buffs with Phainon, because one of the biggest issues, just like with Bronya, is that the buff expires way too quickly. Now, this is no longer the case for Phainon. You can basically enjoy the full duration of the Dream Diver massive crit damage buff for the entirety of Phainon's ultimate stage. The additional skill points is also very nice for a unit like Sunday, Tingyun, or like Sunday, Bronya, and Phainon to use all of their skills with very little consequence. Although you want to be a little bit careful of Aventrin, as you can see, my team actually got towards the red during the final segment when we actually get out of the ultimate. I'm looking forward to try a team where I run all Sunday, Bronya, and Sparkle all in one, but for that, like I mentioned, there's way too many things I want to show you guys, but this is pretty much it for Sparkle, right? And lastly, I just had to try a run with Chibi because everything about her kit seems to be anti-synergistic with Phainon, drastically reducing her follow-up attack as well as ultimate attacks during the ultimate phase, but somehow we managed to get a 1 cycle event tree with the highest single AoE blast of 1.6 million using Ezreal, right, at Ezreal. This performance was wildly gonna be differing based on if Phainon can get hit and reach 12 stacks immediately for the very first rotation going to each wave. Otherwise, as you can see from the Sarok side, we didn't get hit by the Wolf, which means that we actually could not get our 12 stacks immediately, and we couldn't even 0 cycle wave 1, right? So from there, it actually snowballed all the way into 3 cycles, but on the scenario that we actually get 12 stacks, as you can see from the Adventuring side, we are able to get a 1 cycle and almost a 0 cycle against Adventure on my very first try, if not for the goddamn Dicers, right? So that is pretty much it. Now, I do love to show you Cypher, Jiao Qiu, all the other different things, but at this point, the video is already more than 40 minutes long, so I'm just gonna wrap it up over here. This is probably one of the most interesting characters that I've ever tested in the early access. Really happy that I can get my hands on him, but that is going to be it for the general baseline guide for Phainon's early access review. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Expect a lot more in-depth data, in-depth testings, in-depth guides, all the showcases that we're going to be doing going forward in the future. July is going to be an absolute cinema month. 3.4 is a cinema month for HSR, and I am glad that you guys are going to be watching my content, right? So that is pretty much it. Word of the day is going to be unlimited budget works. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join Kick. Use code POKE for 10% off all gamers out, all best or gadget pools. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.